GM everyone, I'm Titus, the VP of Go-to-Market at Civic, where we empower developers with privacy-preserving tools for user and identity management. This podcast dives into how digital identity is transforming industries at the intersection of Web 2 and Web 3. And as always, before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us on your favorite platform. Your support makes a difference, helps the podcast grow. Today, we're joined by Cory Petty from Logos. We'll be exploring one company's approach to building a radically decentralized tech stack. We're super glad that you were able to join us today, Cory, or should I say Dr. Cory. And we definitely love the way your bio says focused on building a whole resistant technology. It feels super relevant in today's crypto space. There's a lot of crazy stuff happening all over the map, and we definitely want to prioritize talking to the OG builders and people building the core infrastructure to move this industry forward. So before we begin, let's start with your story. Your academic background is super impressive, and then that led you into blockchain, this decentralized technology. I'm sure people want to learn how that happened.
I'll try to keep it short. Definitely an odd story, maybe. First off, thanks for having me. I really like that people are trying to dive into these types of issues and not do some of the more topical, easy to reach stuff, because I think this really gets to the core of why we're building this type of technology. I came from a high performance computing and chemistry and physics background, where I focused on doing physics on supercomputers that simulated chemical reactions. A big portion of that was trying to scale how big we could do things, which is a high performance computing scenario, meaning that how fast can we solve really, really big problems on supercomputers, which is kind of like a subset of the type of computing we do in these blockchain networks, these decentralized networks. They're just tuned for high performance and a lot of centralization and control. So I was doing my graduate school, learned about Bitcoin through a TED Talk, actually, talking about the concept of money. I have to go far back and figure out, which one it was, but it's the computational problem was interesting to me. It solved this problem in a really interesting way, and it removed humans from the loop. It removed a constraint that we previously had to get something done using computers, and allowed for some machines to take care of that in a trustless way. And I thought that was really interesting. That kind of dove me into doing research on Bitcoin and doing mining and just learning as much as I could in the process while I continued doing my PhD. And when I finished that, I had an opportunity to move to Brazil to do some more work. And all of my friends who I did mining with are no longer there. So I sold my rig, moved to Brazil, continued doing some postdoctoral research, and I had a lot of not responsibility, if you will. I had a lot of free time, and so we decided to in order to keep in touch with my friends who were also into this type of thing, we started a podcast called the Bitcoin Podcast, and that gave us a lot of really interesting opportunities to keep our finger on the pulse of what was going on in Bitcoin, which back then was basically the Bitcoin subreddit. That's about all there was. Well, you had to watch really to keep up with all the news. Definitely not the situation today. And talk about it. And we got to reach out to people and ask them what's going on. And it gave me the opportunity to learn a lot from the people who were building at that time. We just kept that going. And that grew, and that was really fun. And it gave me a lot of experience and the opportunity to contribute back to the ecosystem based on the things I was learning. So I did some writing and analysis, specifically around the ICO era of Ethereum. Decided I want to leave, and so just do blockchain full time. It was this really interesting opportunity and something that was changing the world, in my opinion. Back then, it was we were gonna take over the whole banking industry and take everything, and we had a lot of really ambitious goals. And I fell full-hearted for it. So I became a data scientist / Bitcoin educator for government contracting agencies. Did that for a number of years and learned a lot about security. And then through serendipity, I had become friends with Jared Hope from Status, one of the earlier ICOs, from some kind of work that I had done with them early on in the project for their ICO. He learned about what I did through some random community conversation we were having and asked if I wanted to join. And I've been there ever since, trying to help push that project along. And it's grown substantially from its original ambitions to broadening its scope to also doing infrastructure as opposed to just access to Web3.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like a lot of us came to crypto in a curiosity driven way and then stayed for the people that were like building early on and like
Oh yeah.
kind of felt the foundation of the industry like being propped up by people driven, but also like very smart people that wanted to do good things for the world to the most part. And I feel like that's the thing that keeps a lot of us going.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, the people here and the ideals and aspirations and want to change the world for good definitely keeps you around.
Yeah, exactly. So let's dive into logos a little bit. Tell the audience like what's the mission, what problems are you aiming to solve in this decentralized world?
All of them, which is a little ambitious, but like we're definitely harkening back to what we would call the Holy Trinity, this a model that Ethereum started with. When Ethereum first introduced themselves, they covered the three pillars, if you will, of a decentralized stack that allowed you to build real decentralized applications. That's storage, which back then was called Swarm. You had communications, ephemeral communications, which they called Whisper. And then you had Ethereum, the blockchain itself, which is something like a coordination network or a network of agreements where you could do smart contracts and arbitrary business logic, like a decentralized computer. And you needed all three of these in order to produce something that was really decentralized, that gave you the level of resiliency and censorship resistance that you need in order to like build the types of applications we were thinking about back then. And through a number of reasons and attempts to scale and focus, the Ethereum community decided to not put as much attention on Swarm and Whisper and focus on the blockchain. And they've been very successful in doing that. And the attempt to scale, I'd say, has also been really successful in building out how do you build the blockchains in such a way where they can incorporate more and more transactions per second and people and generality and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, through those optimizations of scale and as it grew, privacy kind of took a back seat because you needed to get more and more users. And that wasn't as a priority as much as it used to be in the very beginning. The Logos, when Status started, our aim was to provide a window into Web3, namely Ethereum at that time, because we bought full on to that vision of the Holy Trinity. We wanted to make sure that we provided easy to use, intuitive interfaces for people to access decentralized applications using this technology in a decentralized way. It's not obvious on how these things work or how you can build an application that gives you the same user experience on, say, your mobile device. And we tried, and the infrastructure wasn't quite there yet, right? It was very difficult. Namely, like for instance, we used Whisper. We ran Ethereum nodes on phones, and we burned them. It was really hard. Like those things were not built for resource starved devices. And so Logos was the inevitable expansion of Status into building infrastructure, a real decentralized infrastructure stack with a strong emphasis on privacy for a specific reason. So like privacy isn't necessarily the goal in all of this. It's a requirement of the goal, which is real censorship resistance, right? You can't have generality at the base layer unless you have privacy, because it's like privacy in effect is a lack of constraints. When you add privacy, you're further constraining the system. So in our opinion, the base layer, like the real infrastructure for applications needs to be private. Otherwise, like you're making a trade-off on behalf of other people. So Logos is an attempt to build a real decentralized privacy stack.
Makes sense. And I think like, yeah, as a kind of early Ethereum user myself, like I've been puzzled by how easy it is to kind of follow the money essentially on Ethereum, and that makes it very hard to use for use cases where like my name is attached to my wallet and like people know all the time who I'm paying for what and what's my net worth. Like that's something we don't share freely in like a non-Web3 world, and even in the Web3 world that becomes dangerous, especially with like incidents like people getting kidnapped or held for ransom or being robbed at gunpoint and being like forced to
$5 wrench attack.
Yeah, exactly. And it's crazy how kind of in the back burner that idea sat just to kind of bring in more users. I mean, the other thing I think you mentioned as you were describing logos, and there's a limited amount of people that want to and can understand how these networks work in the detail that we require them to sometimes when we build products for them. And I think that's been the early ethos was like, do your own research, understand what code you're deploying, understand what wallets you're using. It's like, sure, you can, I can, maybe like another 1 million to 10 million, 100 million people can, right? But there's other 7-8 billion people out there that won't or can't.
Yep. Or don't care.
And don't care, right? And like, how do we expand the network beyond the initial core adopters that really understand how things works? And I think when account abstraction and like delegated accounts and abstracted private keys or private keys connected to authentication became more the talk of the town, like 5 years ago, this would have been heresy in the crypto space, right? Oh, you don't hold your own keys like directly, like not your keys, not your coin. Sure, yes, but if your keys are connected to some secret that you control through some other mean of proving that you own that account, it's still technically your keys. It's not like you hold them in a whatever file or written down on some piece of paper or engraved in metal. I've seen also, so all sorts of options. But I think coming back to logos and what you guys are building, I think years ago there was a lot of hype around Libra and like what Facebook was trying to do with launching their own token, and then that got shut down pretty quickly. And I think the conversation peaked at a point where people were starting to imagine Facebook as being like a meta state or a meta country, a network like the network state. And you mentioned yourself as well, like, well, these network states could sometime, like at some point, rival traditional nation states. And I'm curious to get your take on that, because that's a big take.
Yeah. So like how we get there, I'm not sure. It's not going to be a one-stop shop. Like, oh, now we have a nation state type situation. But if we're able to provide this infrastructure, it allows us the situation of building these kind of proto states. It's like the internet is a new frontier, and how we denominate boundaries of that new frontier has yet to be discovered. And right now, the nation states are attempting to set those boundaries and ownership, but it's not necessarily something that's theirs. It's everyone's, in our opinion. And so we are actively trying to build technologies that allow us to build fair, economical, transparent boundaries in the internet or in the cyber state to give people the freedom to build the communities the way they want. And you're providing them a lot of things you can't get in a nation state, like the ability to opt in and exit, which is a very important part of what freedom should have. Like when I opt into a community, I should understand what I'm opting into. And my right to exit is a vote in a lot of ways too. And so, in our opinion, you can build very strong, economically powerful communities with the technology we have today and what we're continuing to build in such a way where they're comparable to nation states. They have some type of power at the nation state level because value is power. It gives you a seat at the negotiation table in a lot of ways. And there's a stat that Jared likes to say in terms of like government efficiency. I think it's like a small increment in government efficiency makes the difference between like the entire GDP of like Sweden. I forgot the exact thing, but there's small efficiencies in governance give you tremendous opportunities for wealth. And so if we're able to make efficient governing systems, we can give people a lot more power to build economically strong communities in the way that they want to, and give them a seat at the global table. Now, there's a lot of nuance and various places you can apply these things, and even like physical jurisdictions like special economic zones and interesting, economic territories that already exist across the world. But like it even starts with a subreddit. Like it goes as small as your local community of, basket weaving that you're into. If you're able to build it in a way that allows you to gain value commensurate to your contribution, then that's important for us. So like just building online communities and giving people the power to do it the way they want to themselves within their community is really important to us.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I'm more kind of attuned to the identity piece of this than anything else by the nature of Civic and what we're doing here, but also by the nature of my own personal experience moving from Eastern Europe to Western Europe and then to the US, and then having to kind of rebuild my identity from scratch in a new system in a way that I was not expecting, especially like as people were claiming like, oh, we're living in this like global interconnected world. It's like, no, we're not. Like I have to like have a 0 credit score to begin with in both countries that I was new in. And like there was this catch-22 where you need to have an address to be able to get a job, and to be able to get an address you needed a job. And then like, how do you break that cycle where some element of identity is transferable in some way? But coming back to like the nation state comparison, I think in a way the network state holds an identity for its own members,
Very much
right?
so.
A collection of experiences or some traits or some like verifiable credentials essentially that person has earned or produced proof for. And then in the same way, the nation states give you at birth, they give you the birth certificate, that's your like core credential. If without that, you don't exist for any state, I would argue, that functions under that system. And then you have the passport that gives you the right to travel. And then you have the like national ID in some places, other places, driver's license, and so on, that give you other rights to access certain things. And in the same way, the network state gives you those access by being a class of user or another. It's just like, I think the nation state is the gatekeeper from that perspective, a single gatekeeper, a single source of truth. The originator is identified, known, and controlled by the government, whereas in the network state, the narrative is very different.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting just to explore the identity space, and importantly, like an important factor of that is like not having identity base baked into the foundation gives us room to experiment with what it means to have an identity and how you disclose that identity in different places to different people, and the security of that disclosure, right? Because like with zero knowledge proofs and new cryptographic systems, I can tell you that I'm above 18 without telling you my age. I can do all these different types of disclosure in different communities that prove who I am within a certain domain without giving you all of who I am. I think that's really important. And also, like, these types of standards are not baked into a single system. So, like, if you're thinking about identity and who we are on the internet, it allows us to make standards that give us a lot more freedom to expose who we are to different people and transfer those things into different places, including nation states alone, because they can adopt this stuff too.
Yeah, and we're seeing some of the intersection of that with the DID standards on the decentralized identity front, with digital identity being rolled out as identity wallets in many places,
Yeah.
albeit we're seeing a lot of interesting centralized solutions that are prone for surveillance, like certain governments issuing their own kind of official wallet, and then, I mean, they probably track every interaction at that point moving forward. So you need some layer of privacy then as you're interacting with services to be able to preserve that or control that on your end.
It's fascinating. I'm so excited to watch where it goes once we have, more and more experience happening in the real world.
Yep, 100%. But coming back to logos, and like, how do you see like the role of developers evolving in this decentralized future? Like, how can people contribute? What does that community look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like right now, we're tuning everything for the developer experience. We'd like to build, because we have the three pillars. We have Codex and Waku, Waku is in production. You can use that today. It's been used in a number of different projects in Web3 ecosystem, including Status, obviously, for communications. We have Codex, which is decentralized storage. It's kind of the progenitor of Swarm, if you will, which is, in testnet now. We'll be going to mainnet soon, within a year, we hope. And then Nomos, which will also have levels of testnet and mainnet within a year or two. So we have the three pillars, and it's compatible with a bunch of other things. And then we have this thing called Logos, which is the kind of the glue to all of this. So Logos allows you to kind of bring these different pieces in as modules and a bunch of other peripheral things like identity and key management, whatever, to build applications in an easy way, in a permissionless way. You can kind of link all of these things together, build things that are useful for people and targeted towards people of that use. Because like it's really important to realize that like at the end of the day, like we're coordinating people, so people have to be there. We need to be solving a real problem. The Logos is an attempt to provide a developer experience for people to play and do that and find real use cases and explore without us having to like limit them. We just try to provide tools that they can use to build. And then we amplify the things that work, the things that are actually making meaningful change in the world. Like that's kind of the developer portion of it, is to enable but we call it now growing the tribe. We try to grow the tribe. We build spears, we teach people to hunt, and they go after and get users and make change. And then we amplify that change when it's useful, right? When we think it's kind of along the lines of our ethics and principles. And you have status, which kind of lives on top of this thing, which allows us to kind of give examples of how to do this in a way that's we think is useful. How do you leverage logos and building and consuming infrastructure to then provide user experiences for people that are useful for a given community? For that community, obviously S&T and status is an example. But like logos isn't limited to S&T. It's whatever, as long as you have a module to incorporate into it. So like that's kind of the idea, is we have an infrastructure that is the stack, but what we think is the ideal decentralized stack, and a glue that allows you to use that and anything else permissionlessly to build user applications for people that want to solve real problems. And then an example of how we want to do that, and to help others kind of show the way.
So what would be a good entry point for somebody that's a developer interested in joining, participating? Like, where should they start?
Right now, we have a number of Discords. Join the Discords. We'll be releasing kind of the initial MVP implementation of Logos Core. People can start playing with now. You can play with the projects now. You can get in their Discords, GitHub. It's all open source, all free. Give us feedback. One of the artifacts that we mandate through development is specifications. So like you're a developer or a protocol researcher, read the specifications, see how we can improve them. And so we're actively trying to position ourselves so that people understand all the different components of this and how to interact with them appropriately based on their skill set. If you're not technical, join the Discord. We have movement building going on how to get people aware of like why this stuff matters, where the problems are, so that we can come up with ideas on how to fix them. And so like, if no matter what you are, there's a way you can contribute, whether it be kind of helping people identify what's going on, why there's a problem, why we think we can fix it, to like, hardcore protocol resources, to just, developers trying to figure something out and play around.
Yeah, and I think that's a big piece, I think, that we didn't touch upon at the beginning. I want to come back to that core idea we're talking before going live. It's the decentralization ethos, that aspect of the crypto space that attracted a lot of us early on. Is like, well, how can we break the monopolies? How can we break the single sources of truth and the control that comes from like a single entity? That ethos has diluted, I think, slightly in the past few years, as people have sought to trade decentralization to speed and like network capacity and like other attributes that they were criticizing about the more legacy networks. And I feel like there's like you and like with the Logos group and like the community there, you guys are advocating for kind of like coming back to that ethos that kicked off this whole network and building around Bitcoin and Ethereum early on and other networks.
Yeah, it's a hard one, because in some cases, this trade-off space, it's worthwhile to make those compromises for optimizing performance or something. There's an analogy I like to use on why some of these trade-offs are okay, and that's Coinbase. Coinbase is a really good example for this. Like, I can introduce someone to Coinbase, and it's a perfectly centralized solution for managing crypto. It's not your keys, not your money, for sure. But what it does is provide me the option to remove those tokens and put them on a decentralized network and give full responsibility to myself and control. It's a big step for people. It's a big behavior change and responsibility. So like, we need those solutions to help handhold people who don't care or don't know to the things that we think they should know and should care about. So regardless of what perfect idealized infrastructure we build, there's always going to be central solutions, because we need that handholding process, right? But when it's the only thing we have, and it's all we care about, and it's usually around money, and those options aren't provided, and the options that are provided are so cumbersome to use that no one's going to use them, then we have problems. And that's kind of where we went. We like, through each kind of bull cycle or hype cycle, we gained significantly number of users. And when it came down, we retained a portion of those users, but like a portion of those users each time were incrementally distant from this ideology we started with of like hardcore decentralization and like privacy matters and taking responsibility for your own data and finances matter, because we've obfuscated it away. All the things we kept building were like, I'm going to rebuild the thing I already understand on blockchain and try to provide the exact same user experience. So like, what do you expect? People aren't having behavior changes when they stick around. They just expect the same thing. And so like, we kind of need to have canaries or people continuously to explain that those things still matter. And we need to build things with that ideology still intact without compromise, such that when it's needed, it's still there. You can still take your money off of Coinbase and put it somewhere where you can control it. Otherwise, we're just going to end up rebuilding the same thing.
Yep, 100% agree. And then there's like even more kind of arm's length, or even like, I don't know, 6-foot length separations now of tools with ETFs, right? We actually don't even have a method of taking that token off that ETF and then putting it somewhere where you have self-custody. It's just a representation of
like
value.
what's different here? You know, like you get exposure to something, but there's no real behavior change.
Exactly. And I think like there was a resurgence now of what I think in the previous hype cycle, there was attempts on bringing cards with like stable coins and with like spend your crypto, but it wasn't as successful, I think, in that cycle with stable coins not being as adopted as they are today. I think now we're more in a space where there's a few cards that give you that option, that gets you more closer to like, well, hey, I can actually use these things in the real world as opposed to just being funny internet money.
Yeah, I mean, a part of it is just us learning how to do this better. And like, we've continuously grown. Like in terms of the science and the technology and wisdom that we've gained over the years in growing this industry, it's phenomenal. Like looking back at old wallets in Bitcoin Core with your wallet.dat file. So like the expansive technology of wallets today across all the ecosystem, that alone is mind-blowing. Take into account all the other ridiculous technological improvements that we've made across the board. Like, we're just getting better at solving these types of problems and exploring that option space of like what the compromise we're giving, right? So like, it's really interesting to see. Like, it's going to keep going. It's going to keep growing. We're going to get better at it, and so we're just get hopefully better at giving users options to make things that are appropriate for them, so they can make informed decisions for themselves, and not us making decisions on behalf of them. I think that's the goal for a lot of this stuff, is like just giving people the options they need.
Yeah, and I think that's even more important now, where arguably anyone can start developing real products and real tools for themselves or for their community with the help of these LLMs that like are front and center on most most communities. Yeah, it's like if you input like requests into like a GPT or a Claude or like your favorite LLM, you will be able to get some results out of it. I'm curious what your take is on that, relating to what you guys are building and what type of skill is needed in your communities.
I mean, we need skill across the board. Like, I don't think we're going to do away with developers. What it means to be a developer is going to change. What it means to be a protocol researcher is going to change. But like, right, like just looking at the pace of innovation between these things is staggering. What I could do with vibe coding a year ago is nothing compared to what I can do with vibe coding today. But the skill that I need to hone to do that is basically the same thing. I need to understand how to orchestrate, give requirements, constraints on exactly what I need. I need to tell the thing exactly what I need. And that's system, like the engineering and software architecture, right? I need to be able to explain things in a way that ensures I'm getting the results that I want. That's never going away. It can help you explore that space and problem solve and test to make sure you're doing that. It's going to be a while before we completely mitigate that skill. You need to know when it's bullshit. You need to be able to call it out, right? And that's where you end up with a lot of like really insecure solutions of someone saying, "Hey, if I coded this app, maybe a bunch of money, and it's gone because it was incredibly insecure." And so, like, it's going to be a while, but I think it will happen in terms of taking over a good portion of the development effort if we can hone that skill correctly. Part of the organization that, like, so I'm a part of the IFT, which is the Institute of Free Technology, which is somewhat of like a management company of Logos and Status and Nimbus. And we help try to like apply your resources appropriately to the projects to make them successful, and make sure that they're collaborating where appropriate, and so on and so forth. So one of those things that I think we're looking into instilling as a process is, in order, this is what Spotify recently did, no, Shopify, sorry. In order to get an approval for a new core contributor or employee, you need to prove that AI can't do it. Like, you need to justify it. This is a genuine human need, and I think that's an important thing to be resourceful and sustainable, is to use these tools, learn to use these tools appropriately, and get humans when you need them and not when you don't.
Yep, agreed 100%. And I think it's changing not just like software development, but all of our jobs are being changed right now as we speak. Parts of it can be automated, parts of it can be replaced. But then, to your point, orchestration becomes the number one skill. Critical thinking, understanding what is from that output. Yeah, what's good, what's important, what can be applicable to what I'm doing, and then distilling everything into like, here's my input, here's my output. How do I bridge that gap? Like, this is what I want to achieve. Like, help. Like, let's co-build. Let's brainstorm ways to refine this data, transform this information, add context, make this helpful, useful. So I'm really excited about where this is going from that perspective.
Very much so. Yeah, that's incredibly excited. It really, when you build things in a permissionless way, or when you build things that allow for permissionless building on top of it, you enable people to experiment with what you're building. And having AI at people's hands, and if you can structure the project such that easy for them to incorporate your project into AI, so like you use these rules for context, you enable a lot of experimentation, because you're also enabling that person to help orchestrate with your technology. That's a part of what we'd like to do too, right? Is like it help on-ramp people for using our technology when they're using AI to build things, because that's an important part of it, right? So that gives them the expectations up front on how you're supposed to use this thing and what type of things you should be getting out of it. And as infrastructure builders, that's really important.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the benefit comes from like accelerated like setup and on-ramp to these new technologies. Because I feel like if you're not a developer that's working day to day in like, I don't know, Node, for example, like you don't know that you need npm installed or like how to install the right npm libraries and like how to spin up the local host for it. Like all those things are net new. And a lot of the npm based documentation you see out there assumes some knowledge of npm.
Yep.
Or if you're like building a lot around the wallet, it's like people assume that you know what like Solana or EVM wallet looks like from a technical perspective, what functions you need to call. And I think we need to either like add more context with the help of these LLMs, or point people like how to add that context and set them up for success as they're building. Like, if you just need to spin up a Docker container, tell me how to do that. Don't assume I know how to spin up a Docker container. Or send me to the documentation that's another 25 pages that I'm like, I want to play with your thing, not learn about Docker from scratch now.
A good portion of my job is helping people understand what good documentation is.
It's hard. It's a harder problem than people think. I think like as you write documentation or you see how people consume documentation, it's a head scratcher sometimes.
Very much so.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So I know we're nearing the end, and I want to kind of wrap things up with, are there any upcoming developments or milestones that you guys are expecting from Logos in the near future that people should look out for?
Oh man, we have a lot. A keycard shell, which is our hardware wallet. Previously we had just keycard. Where's my guy here? We had just keycard, which was our hardware wallet, but it needed to be paired with the mobile app in order for you to use this. So this took your keys from your mobile app and put them on here. So you can use NFC to tap, put it in a card reader to basically do all the signing and keep things more secure than on a mobile device. But like, you still needed some interface to show you what transactions you were signing and such. So we developed what's called keycard shell, which is the ability to put this in here and it become a fully fledged hardware wallet by itself, which is compatible via QR codes. So like fully air gap, fully open source. This just got launched on a pre-sale. You can go to keycard.tech and get a pre-sale. We're really excited about this, kind of expanding the idea of how you do like account management on these things. You can create accounts really, really quickly. So it gives kind of a new hardware wallet experience. Codex is in testnet. We'll be looking into doing an incentivized testnet soon. So get involved with that to figure out how you can, what storage looks like on the Logos stack, and when mainnet comes out. Domos doing something similar sometime early next year. Waku continues to grow. We have a lot of really interesting things coming up with Status, which should heavily increase the developer experience of the Status community. Those announcements will be coming out pretty soon. Nimbus has a number of improvements, a unified Ethereum client, both EL and CL. So you can use that all in one binary to make it really simple to start validating on the Ethereum ecosystem. It also has verified proxies for helping secure random RPC endpoints so that when you're looking at a transaction using RPC, like name an RPC off the top of my head, I'm blanking. Infura?
Or Infura, yeah.
You don't have to trust it anymore. It allows us to use the Ethereum blockchain in a special way to trust to remove the trust from any RPC endpoint. And Fluffy, we have a Fluffy client from Nimbus. So we have a number of things across the ecosystem happening. And what's, I think, the most interesting to me is Logos Core. And that is the ability to experiment with this stuff with a very friendly developer environment. Like the developer experience of like taking each of these components and putting them together and then building a UI and exposing that to somebody else should be the best in class. And that's coming out. Like we're in the process. We have the POC. We've shown that it works. We'll be rebuilding it to make it production quality and letting it out and just trying to get people to play with it and explore, see what people do, and then amplify what people do when it's important to us. So like, there's a lot of things to follow. We do a lot of stuff. I probably missed some things, but like next year is going to be a big one.
Awesome. Like that's a lot. Sounds like a lot going on. What's the best channel for people to keep up with all of this?
Logos Network on the X. You can go to Discord, the Logos Network. We're working on ways to kind of help push people in the right direction based on their interests, skill set, things like that, where they can learn. I'd start with, Logos, and we'll help you navigate to where you want to go from there.
Well, you heard the man. Give some follows, join some communities over there, get involved. Sounds like a good opportunity to learn about a new network, new kind of ethos around the decentralization in our space. And that being said, I'm going to wrap up. Big thank you to Dr. Cory, for an awesome chat. It's like very cool to meet people that are super early in the space and still here, still excited, still building like the right things.
Super excited.
And everybody, our listeners, thank you for enjoying this episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us on your favorite platform. It helps us bring you more great content. And don't forget to check out civic.com and learn about what we do. Over and out.